Good evening, everybody,
Oh
and
my
welcome to
god.
Commentaries. What's wrong?
No one saw that. Okay, continue.
mm.
Sorry.
Mulligan? Good,
Anyway,
e- Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Commentaries Magic Stream on today, Sunday, September 22nd, 2024. I'm, as always, Grandpaws.
Big cheese.
and
No, you don't get an intro from me. You already ruined it.
all of our
I
patron
did-
supporters.
I didn't even see what was up there. Was it just the patron
It was the
slide?
patron slide, yeah.
In terms of things that could be displayed at inopportune times on a stream, that's probably pretty mundane.
Maybe I should run the stream once, just in case.
You
Okay,
can run the last stream ever do, by
Alright.
virtue of the fact that you will have run the last stream we ever do.
okay. What else do I have in here? Do I actually have anything interesting? No. Just 2 copies of the rating slide because we need more copies of that.
Don't you have spoilers on there? Not anymore.
No.
Not anymore. Soon.
Oh, here we go. I got one that's a picture of the stream control window. There we go. Gonna pull a Linus Tech Tips here and accidentally the stream key.
There you go. Quality.
Anyway, technical difficulties involving changelings gnawing on various power cords aside.
What are we screaming about into the void today?
Yeah, something like that. So,
Dex?
Dex?
last time we covered the who and what of Continentals. This time we're going to cover the how. Now, those of you who are asking the obvious question, what about when, where, and why? You should know the answer to all 3 of those. But in case you don't know why, ponies.
That's why we go to cons.
This is true.
The ponies.
But specifically for this stream, we're going to be taking a deeper look at a few lists which are, to use an expensive word, exemplary of well-performing decks. I think that cost enough. Not just what the cards that make up the list are, because we did kind of discuss that last time, but why those cards were chosen in the context of the larger, admittedly speculative meta in this case. What about those cards, if you will, makes these decks tick? Now, when you deck build for competitive play, and especially in a situation like this where we've just had a gigantic format change caused by the set rotation, you don't really understand what the meta is going to look like. But you still, if possible, need to understand what type of deck you're hoping to build and how that will function within a possible larger meta. How a particular archetype will play from one meta to the next can vary wildly. So, last format, aggro tended to look like a giant neon trader bug making a bunch of tokens. But it could also, if you go back a little bit further, look like Luna and a bunch of assorted Pegasi running all over the place at warp speed. Farm can take many forms as well. You can have antisocial things like Premier Twilight, or you can go very friend heavy like Seleno Pink. You can have Grogar just, sit there and not worry about getting all up in people's grills because he's going to flip so many cards it doesn't matter. Control as well. You can keep up troublemaker walls. You can focus on board control through disruption or other means. And we're going to talk about one of these, in fact. So we'll save that one.
Now, the important question, of course, is how do you know where to start then? How do you avoid misreading a meta and building something that may be functional but underwhelming or underperforming? Now, a big part of that is going to come down to knowing the variety of techniques that each archetype might use in order to accomplish their game plan, and looking through various resources, Ponyhead, Horse Archive, any of these, to see which of those techniques are likely best positioned within any given metagame. This means not only understanding the ways that a given archetype has played in the past, but knowing what it was about those different deck lists or playstyles that allowed them to be successful. And oftentimes, that will just come down to looking for specific words or phrases on cards' abilities. And it's not just limited to keywords either.
Hey, I saw this card. It says score a point.
That's probably a pretty good aggro card. It could also be a pretty good combo card. Admittedly, everyone likes points, right? But those two decks are the ones that are probably going to be most concerned with it. So, just as a couple of examples here, if you're looking to build an aggro deck, you'd probably want to be looking for cards that are going to have words or phrases like point, or move, or pay less, or power, or token friend, or hasty, because these are all things that successful aggro decks in the past have used to allow them to do whatever it is that they did.
And the kind of things that they do is, generally speaking, go fast.
Right. But what if you're not playing aggro?
Get things cheap. Make things powerful beyond what they should be.
Right. We've got other examples here. Farm, might be looking for cards that say, like, when you win, or flip an additional, or flip additional. Can't be frightened is always very good. And of course, looking for that epic trait on your troublemakers, or the villain trait, because, sometimes you don't need those friends. You just need a body.
Or sometimes you have a card that makes things epic.
Mm-hmm. We've seen that before. Control might be looking at, forms of removal. So dismissal or banishment, right? So looking for cards that say dismiss or banish or return to owner's hand or things like that. Anything that's referencing opposing or opponents is usually a pretty good indicator, because that shows that you are interacting with something that's going on the opposite side of the table. Must pay, right? That's an interesting phrase. It normally has some type of a tax effect on there, so that can be good for control. Obviously, troublemaker can be a useful card type to be looking for. Discard is an interesting word when it comes to control, because many times control will like being able to mess with its opponent's hand, and that's a very useful thing to be able to do. You think about, like, Tempest and Grubber, you think about Coriander Cumin, you think about Eyebrow Raise, you think about Garble, all of these cards. And we've got some more in here as well. But it also can refer to the discard pile. And if there's one thing that Control loves doing, it's using the same trick over and over again. If it worked the first time, it'll probably work the third time. Another interesting thing to look for Control is anything that says immediate. Because usually, if you are the one that is supposed to be providing answers to the question that your opponent is asking, you want to give them as few opportunities as possible to ask another question. So anything you can interact with at immediate speed, your best bet. Geez, how about some combo or mid-range words?
Well, combo likes points. Any alternative way of scoring points? It likes AT. Weird ways of gaining AT. Drawing cards. Stopping your opponent from doing anything that says can't. and generally likes mixing with the discard pile, either resetting it or getting things out of it, that kind of thing. Mid-range is kind of, in between control and aggro, and likes to dismiss things. It likes to pay less for things because it likes to play, kind of bigger friends, but not fairly. Likes power counters, diligent or any other way of gaining power counters, and likes exhausting things.
Yeah, since mid range isn't necessarily going for those DFOs every single turn, having cards that exhaust, which are normally only usable once per turn cycle, become more valuable the longer the game goes, because in theory you'll get more uses out of their abilities.
Yeah. And even and also exhausting opposing friends.
Right.
Just anything to slow down the opponent while, setting up so that you can just maybe pay 2-3 AT a turn and double confront.
Mm-hmm.
Just on the size of your friends rather than fun tricks.
Right. The notable difference there is aggro doesn't mind if it immediately loses all that power. Mid-range would like to, keep its investments around.
Yeah. Invest in your friends.
Friendship is line go up.
Yes. Get those returns.
That's right. Well, we mentioned earlier that there were a few different ways that you could play control, for instance, either focusing on a troublemaker wall or focusing on board control. And I think the first deck that we're going to go into a little more detail about today is a great example of the latter half. Ivory, you want to take us through what we're going to look at first?
Sure. So the first deck we're going to look at is the list that was ran by Pages, which was Mono Purple Princess Celestia Royal Tutor. Now, at first glance, this is like, oh, there's no troublemakers, so surely it's not control. No. This is go home. Now, a lot of these events are events that we've actually seen before. So one of the things that when you look at a format rotation, obviously the first thing you think about is what's new. But after you look at what's new, you're like, okay, what's still here? Purple lost very little of its key events as far as control goes. The only new event we see here is Magic Brownout, which is, once again, go home. So it already fits in. With the addition of Connection Corkboard, you also can reuse those events like was mentioned earlier. If it works so well the first time, let's do it again. Now, the interesting thing here is even though this is still control, you are going to see this deck confronting and DFOing more often than a control deck typically would. You have a problem deck that is very easily confronted by the characters here. And Royal Tutor herself can easily tutor out things like Luster Dawn, Big Celestia, Big Twy, as needed. Basically anything that can intimidate your opponent from starting face-offs themselves and also guarantee your own face-off wins, because you don't have the highest flip average here, mainly because there's no troublemakers. But face-offs are still very easily won through other means here. You don't have as many AT generators. You do still have Trixie, and you can get some reduced cost with Snack Stand. And Big Twy gives you 1 AT at the start of your turn. But you do have to play it a little safer at the beginning. You probably won't be scoring too many points the first chunk of the game, but once you've amassed enough resources, you basically just push everything home, and aggro and mid-range are very sad because a lot of times their high-value friends are not really something that you want to be moving, you want to be playing.
You're going to be sad if all of your valuable things are at home.
Yeah, you tend to these with the current meta, mid-range especially really values the turn that it's played to the problem on a lot of their cards, but you're pushing it home immediately when not all possible. And it makes them very upset because now they can't spend their next turn playing more things. They have to spend things moving things up. And oh no, you have an elderflower, move it back home.
There is an astonishing amount of forced movement in this deck. It may not appear so at first glance, but if you sit here and look at this, you've got Tempest Shadow Open Skies, who turns literally any immediate speed event you play into move an opposing character, provided that you've got enough unity, and that should be easy enough to do. You've got Elderflower, like Ivory mentioned, who is just extremely rude. You've got Levitation Meditation, 3 copies. You've got Worn Out, 3 copies. You've got Magic Brownout, 3 copies. You've got 2 copies of Connection Corkboard there as well. And synergizing with all this, you've got Recipe Research, which if you or your opponent are confronting it, you're going to be able to start duplicating your events, so you can start turning those single character moves into multi-character moves. And if you happen to have Preserving the Evidence out, you're probably actually gaining some number of ATs some of the time when you're moving cards. Now, maybe not gaining, but you're at least getting a refund back.
Breaking even.
Mm-hmm. It's worth noting that many times Control will rely on high-impact, high-cost cards. In this case, you look at something like Big Twy, even Tempest Shadow can be expensive, and then you've got a lot of 3-cost events in here as well. So, more so than aggro, who does like having burst turns, Control often needs to find a way to supplement its own AT generation. And the 2 best ways we have of doing that right now that I'm aware of are all of the AT gaining effects that Purple has, which are Spirit Siphon, Tranquility, Shenanigans with same-day delivery, those sorts of things. Trixie obviously works well. And the other one is more common on White, which is Prepared. But you also see a little bit here on Tempest.
And then, of course, the snack stand is going to be highly valuable for you because purple.
Right.
Can we also point out how clutch changed is right now?
It's surprisingly good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's okay. Get rid of this thing I don't want. Also, now that friend that was a few cards deep that you probably would have really liked to play on your terms, it's now in play at home, and you get no real value out of it.
Well, it's in play.
Sure, but if that was a card like, Sunny and Argyle.
Yeah, anything that has an interplay ability.
Yeah, but everything is at home, so who cares if it's all higher power?
Right.
Right, because
You
that
just-
didn't happen on the terms that they wanted it to. It's effectively just burning the whole ability, because, great, now I just have a body.
Even worse if it's a friend that only has an ability that triggers on being played, right?
Yep.
Now, you also mentioned earlier, Ivory, that this deck was not running the Troublemakers, but it was confronting. This was not a deck that was going to sit there and not start scoring points. And I think that's even more important if you're trying to play Control and you're not relying on a Troublemaker wall, epic or otherwise. If you've got Troublemakers, you've bought yourself some time, provided that they don't instantly fall over to your opponent challenging them. That means you've got at least a couple of turns to build up a board state, to gain momentum back in the game, right? We talk about this sometimes on the stream. We talk about momentum back and forth. Who's really in control of what's going on the game? Who's putting pressure on? Who's making moves? Who's got things established?
Mm-hmm.
If you have Troublemakers stalling for time, not actually stalling, but, buying you time, you can afford to wait until later in the game before you start making aggressive plays. If you're not running troublemakers, you're going to try to want to be matching your opponent point for point as early as possible while still having access to your disruption cards, because it will be that much harder for you to stop them if you ever end up running out of those resources.
Right. And also, one advantage that a deck like this has is we're in a pretty slow meta right now. Decks aren't aggroing anywhere near as fast as they were before, so something like this can actually go against the actual aggro decks and still not be too far behind and sometimes even be ahead.
It's a good point. You start combining Luster Dawn with a few cards in here. I mean, Celestia Restricted Section gets absolutely huge in power, right? Thanks to cards like Spirit Siphon.
She also gets extra power from Connection Corkboard, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. She also gets extra power from Cantor Logic Factory.
There is no Cantor Logic Factory yet. You can't talk about it until the next slide.
We can't talk about that card yet.
Yes,
when the button gets pressed, you can talk about it.
Okay, that's fair. Something else in this deck, we didn't mention it when we were talking about the phrases or keywords earlier, but control and combo, really every deck, but mostly those, really, really like effects that say search on there. Because it allows you to have a greater variety of tools in your deck without diluting your consistency, since you can just run 1 or 2 copies of the card that you sometimes want to see, instead of having to include a full 3 copies and sometimes feeling like it's dead in your hand. When that search word is on your main character, it's even better. Now, in this case, most of the cards that are in here are here at almost full playsets for friends. But it is worth noting that
I mean,
the
the only thing
like
I like,
half.
the only thing I like better than 3 copies of a card that says "move your opponent's things home and make them angry" is 6 copies of a card that says "move your opponent's things home and make them angry."
I mean, you're not wrong.
A guaranteed copy.
You just don't want 9 copies, because if you want 9 copies, then it needs to be banned.
Right.
Exactly.
It is worth noting, though, that in spite of some of these cards being at playsets and some of these cards being at less than playsets, every single friend in this deck is tutorable with Celestia, and I guarantee you that was intentional when it was being built.
100%. This resource is irritating me. Give me the Flurry Heart. I'm behind on points. Give me Luster Dawn.
I need to frustrate my opponent. Big Twy.
Yep.
Tempest. Elderflower.
And I'll tell you a reason why I think that's especially intentional here, and that's because you look at a card like Big Twy, who, unless you have the Unity established, is going to be doing less for this deck's ability to control the game than other choices you could have for 4AT, right? Like, if you're trying to think of a 4-cost friend in purple that will support control, Zip is sitting right over there. She's got Meticulous 2, she's got Vexing, and she's got Persistent. Those are all fantastic control abilities, but...
You know what Zip doesn't have?
A horn.
Correct.
And so Zip's not in here, but that extra consistency you get by being able to gain value out of these cards is even better, right? We talked about what could happen if you haven't built up a board state and applied enough pressure and you start running out of these events in hand. Well, so much of this deck's disruption also comes from its friends that when every event you play or one event you play per turn cycle can also fetch you a friend of your choice from your deck, that's pretty powerful.
By the way, that's like draw, but even better.
Right.
You get to pick your draw. But yeah, this is a big thing with control decks, is repeatable just interruption is incredibly valuable.
which is why we're unbanning F-stop.
Yep. You heard it here.
It was a lie. Refuse to believe. Okay. So that's a pretty good deep dive on control. But there's some other decks we're going to be talking about here as well. And sometimes the deck building philosophy behind them can be a bit of a different approach. So different. Madness fueled. Or synergy. Synergy.
Ready
No.
to talk about Izzy?
No, it's powered by a unicorn who just really wants to be your friend.
Yes. Okay, so the entire point of this deck is that Izzy is cute. That's the whole deck. No.
SGTM.
Okay, so let's analyze the rest of the deck here. Okay, so no Izzy, no Izzy, no Izzy, no Izzy.
There's
Izzy.
There is
Midnight
nowhere
Snack.
near enough Izzy in this deck for your excuse to be Izzy is cute.
We need to print more Izzy cards. Anyway, this deck is so it's mid-range, but it is trying to mill. And that's kind of sort of the goal for winning. Now, I ran this in Continentals, and I did not make top 8. So, kind of want to go over like what was the goal of the deck, and then kind of why it didn't do super well in the meta that we actually played in. So the goal, is to self-mill and then score points off Rock Turret and, get a jump in points with still partying. And it does that, but it kind of takes a while to get there. The other big thing this deck does is because you're getting rid of so many cards, it's nice if you can play them from your discard pile or get them back. So you both have your main who can put it in the top, get a friend or resource, put it on the top 5 cards of your deck, so you can get things back that way. And then also Earth Pony Crystal, which can just put it into your hand. And those actually work pretty well. So you can play most of the cards in the deck, except for the events, from your discard pile. Some interactions here that are pretty interesting. I think a fun one is Message from the Past. You technically can play this card, and you can play it on Earth Pony Crystal, but there's not really any cards in here that you're willing to pay 3 AT plus the 2 from Message from the Past to actually put into play. Like, you have Sprout, but you have so many cards in your discard pile, you can just play Sprout for 0 most of the time. And so Message from the Past is actually there because you can discard it and then get it back. And when you discard it, you trigger a couple different things. You trigger Featherbangs, so you get more Earth Pony tokens. And he gets a power counter. He can actually get quite big. And you trigger Buffagren to get more cards into your discard pile. And you also can have a 10 card hand essentially. And just at the end of turn get rid of Message from the Past, then get it back next turn. And with Pinky Sense, you can actually trigger Featherbangs both on your turn and on your opponent's turn. So you can get some pretty good benefits from that. The next thing that's kind of interesting here is just how good Eager is. Diamond Tiara is here partially because of the counter for Playwright, but also just because she's easy to play early, and Eager is good. Just from drawing cards, but also because Mod Pie and Mudbriar, it changes it there when you draw your 3rd card each turn. You get to put a 3-power Rock Friend token into play, and they can't be frightened. And when you're paying 1 AT a turn to put a 3-power friend into play, that's pretty good. Or 2 3-power friends into play.
And you're also drawing a card in the process.
Yeah, because you're like paying to draw. So you get a card and a 3-power friend. It's better than Berry Dreams. And so you kind of end up in a situation where you're actually turning into let's DFO all the time. And maybe I don't need to mill myself. And so that's actually how I ended up playing during Swiss, because you just didn't have time to mill. The 35 minutes, it not quite fast enough. And so you got Cherry Berry in here, score extra points on replacement, and if you get the right cards out, you can just go fast. Another interesting thing here is, so Earth Bunny Crystal getting friends back, you can get your Wendy's back. So you can actually do a decent job repeatedly disrupting. And you can do that because you need to play Wendy on like your opponent's turn and then get it back on your turn. So you can kind of sort of do it every single turn for your opponent.
With Izzy, since Wendy is a Pegasus.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. With you can't get back with Earth Bunny. Sorry, but yeah, with Izzy, if you're drawing.
And like you said, you're already drawing a fair amount with this list because Eager is so strong.
Yeah. And entry's pretty easy. You've got Ray of Hope and Get Prepared to get in. And if you get a Buffagrin early game and a Pinky Sense and like a Ray of Hope or something, you can 3 AT just flip. So if you're going second, you can do it on your first turn, going first on your second turn. Those were always the best. And like you also disrupt your opponent a little bit because you have to discard a card and get rid of cards from the top of your deck. Yeah, so Mod Pie, so yeah, it works with Eager, but it also works with Minuet and Featherbangs when you actually play him. Get more friends. And then there's basically just lots of synergy with discarding things. Then there's the fun card, the single copy of Counter Logic, which is in 2 colors, not even running. So why is this here? Well, Counter Logic is really good. You banish opponent's cards, and you can like move things. That's kind of the most relevant for this deck, is just moving things for free. Your magic counters don't really matter. Like you can put one on Earth Bunny Crystal, but you're still probably not going to want to use it. I don't think anything else cares about magic counters. Maybe one of the
Comet, I guess, is the only one.
Yeah, Comet cares.
But otherwise, they're mostly just there as like a defensive shield against some of the events that could disrupt cards without counters.
Yeah. And then drawing a card is probably not what you want to use Counter Logic for. But moving things, yes. Because you can move your opponent's things. So, oh no, you're not confronting. Or you can move your things. Yeah, you get to double confront for free.
Or maybe you could be incredibly rude about this and be like, surprise, we're actually having a single face-off.
Yeah. It's so powerful. And it's really easy to get into with Get Prepared and Ray of Hope. And there's 6 copies of those 2 cards, so.
And Ray of Hope you can bring back with Izzy if you have to as well, so you effectively have infinite copies.
Yeah.
Well, until your opponent's Counter Logic banishes your Ray of Hope from discard.
Yeah, you just don't let your opponent run it.
Yeah.
You steal it with I has a bucket.
There you go.
Exactly.
I has a factory. Silverstream is seizing the means of production.
Yeah. So overall, this deck it's fun to play, and it's you can mill. Like if you get 2 Buffagrins and a Pinky Sense out, like you can mill yourself real fast, and then you're scoring lots of points. But most games that just wasn't viable. So I actually sideboarded out the Rock Turrets. I think Tempest Shadow, and I forget what else I was siding out. But like Teppa Shadow and Rock Druids came out most of the games in Swiss. Ruby Jubilee is fun.
Did you ever get her to stick?
I don't think. I think she was too expensive to play. I think I maybe got her out once.
If you can, though.
If you can, she's a little ridiculous.
Well, you mentioned that the best mode of counter logic for this deck was move, right? Because you can always pay 1 AT to draw a card, and, so drawing a card is only saving you 1 action token, and less than that because you've got some eager effects and other card draw, right?
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, the magic counters don't really matter here. But orange and pink don't have super efficient ways of being able to move their own characters. You're usually going to be relying on, blue or some hybrid, shenanigans there. Yellow can sometimes do it too.
So what if you just didn't have to move?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of overcoming one of the weaknesses that the colors that your deck is running would have by branching outside of them, right? And if we were in a meta where we didn't have the type of entry that we did, if we were back to just having motivational speech and rushed makeover and join the herd, my guess is we probably wouldn't see nearly as many decks splashing for Cantor Logic Factory because the entry would just be too challenging.
That's a much bigger ask. You might still.
I mean, it's still a really good card.
But it would be much harder, yeah.
So you said that in your games, you found it was more challenging to actually rely on the mill thing because the games were ending too soon, and so you couldn't really gain the value from Rock Druid or from still partying in terms of point acceleration.
Yeah.
Like, this has actually been a thing that we've seen happen a couple of times in lists in past Continentals, where a deck may have a high gear that it only uses in the longer elimination rounds because it just can't get itself up to speed in order to use it.
Yeah, and I was like, I knew this going in that mill would be difficult during Swiss. But the hope was that, you make it to top cut and then you've got time. But didn't quite work out.
There were also some additional metagame challenges that were going on that this deck especially had a hard time dealing with. Notably, it's tough to answer resources sometimes.
Yeah, I think I just have Bucket.
Yeah.
Also, like, Izzy doesn't like Pip.
No, she doesn't.
It's like, yes, I would like to discard stuff.
Pip likes letting you discard
I have
stuff.
a lot of friends.
Is that why she wants so many new friends?
To throw them at Pip, I guess.
We must feed the Pip No Toad.
Regrettably, I don't have the video on Quick Draw.
I know.
The Pip No Toad.
That's not the first time that we've seen that either. I think you just got done saying that, right? That there have been a number of decks that have kind of gunned for, if I can make it past the top cut barrier, then I'm going to be better positioned.
Yeah, you're playing an interesting gambit, which is there's a section of my deck that is going to be dead in Swiss, and then so maybe I won't be placed as well, but once I get into top cut, you're going to see some stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the cherry berries were fun. I had one game where I drew both of them, like early game, and I think I didn't draw like any orange, or for a while I had no orange. And so I just cherry berried. And only won that game because cherry berry scored like, I don't know, like 7 points or something.
Sometimes it works though, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that there's all these synergies going on in the deck, right? and the different ways that you can use the cards in here, but that right now, in this meta, or at least in the meta that we saw at Continentals, the deck was too slow relevant to other stuff that was going on. Do you think that the core concept of this deck of, focusing on the discard synergies in orange and pink is still good enough that you can tweak a couple of the pieces here and have the deck be functional but maybe better positioned?
I think there's a few tweaks. Like, I think Tempest is just not great. And maybe some other tweaks, but it might take another set to get just over the hump of to really get into tier 1.
If you had Big Mac and Big Eater, would that change your opinion?
Yes. It'd be ridiculous.
It'd be pretty good.
Going from Silverstream to the best resource removal that Orange probably ever got, yeah, I think that'd make a difference.
A little bit.
So good.
He's also an Earth Pony too, so you can bring him back with Earth Pony Crystal.
Yeah, so it's like, I get removal and you can't stop me.
You thought my Big Mac was gone?
Hope you brought Banish.
Yep. Well, I think we got time for one more. So let's take a look at our overlord of social clout and social media influence.
Now, this one's built philosophy was actually just Pip is cute. And that's why there's more Pip cards in here than there was Izzy cards in the previous list.
Hey,
I'll allow it.
This also has Izzy
This
cards.
has more Izzy cards than the Izzy list did.
It has 2.
It does. It does have more Izzy cards. The other card just had Izzy on the art. It wasn't even Izzy. This one has her full name. Amazing.
It's got 2 Izzies.
So other than showcasing how Pip is, this deck's focus was disrupting your opponent's home limit as much as possible, as deeply as possible, and as inopportunely timed as possible. Setting up your Troublemaker wall.
You never know when you're going to get a notif.
Right. And then removing or stealing key threats that do manage to stick around. Or get trashed. So why take this approach to control? Well, part of it, like we've said several times, is aggro is slower and is more friend dependent right now in terms of like the friend's abilities, and an individual body's power is more impactful than it had previously been with aggro decks like Thorax. When you're forcing your opponents to rely more on playing and moving friends to cause problem face-offs instead of just generating a bunch of token copies where you don't really care what happens to them, aggro decks right now actually do care about those individual friends' power. They're playing more like Hot Wings. They're playing more with, I'm DFOing by the skin of my teeth. There's a reduced quantity of dilemmas, and we have an absence now of lacking lesson plans and a few other ways of getting around troublemakers, which means that because those ways are less common, your troublemaker wall is likely to stay up longer, especially when you have cards that are really sticky like Sirens. And now you even have an incentive to go troublemakers as your win condition, even if you're not going for a bunch of epics to try to farm, because you've got Posey. And Posey is a nice incidental flip that can reduce some of the risk of playing troublemakers that may have a higher bonus. But she's also just a fantastic alternate win condition or a win condition supplement in allowing you to score those points or catch up that much faster, right? We talked earlier about if you're setting up a troublemaker wall, the time and the resources that you're pouring into that are likely to have you forfeiting a bit of momentum in the early game. So having a means of catching back up again rather than just going for the single confronts is pretty important, especially when we're dealing with Swiss timing. And then you're also seeing more mid-range oriented decks right now because aggro is slower. And that means that there's a greater variety of friends that grow in value over time or provide more than just a one-shot impact, right? So stealing those friends through either Pip's ability or through Plurite, who has just nasty synergy with Pip, by the way, can allow for a slower control list like this one to gain greater board momentum and either apply constant pressure or take a point lead that much sooner. And it doesn't have to sacrifice its deck's own control capabilities to do so. A great example of this is the colorless unique Spike friend that we have. Spike was in a number of mid-range and control decks right now, and he's one of the most impactful individual friends in new generations as a set. But he costs 5 AT to play, and that's really expensive. Especially for a deck in pink and white whose only means of real AT generation is either going to be Unicorn Token prepared shenanigans or starting to confront with Saddle Row Storefront, and at that point you're basically just getting refunds rather than AT value. But if you can get a Spike into play for, I don't know, 1 AT, and you don't even have to run Spike yourself, now that's some value. So focusing on those control elements, we talked about home limit. You look at the ways that home limit can be disrupted here. Obviously, Pip is going to punish your opponent for retiring stuff to home limit. You've got Windy, who kind of works with this because your opponent is less likely to be leaving their friends at home, which means they're more likely to have those friends at problems, making Windy's ability usable more frequently than it otherwise would be. Comet replaces a problem, sends everything there back home. Rarity reduces home limit. Plurite, right? You play Plurite, play it to your home, switch it with an opposing friend. Your opponent says, fine, I'll retire Plurite. Well, guess what? You then paid 1 AT to put Plurite back into play with Pip, and then
You've
that
activated
happens.
my trap card.
Correct.
Well,
completely surrounded, right? Reducing home limit even further. And then obviously 0 bars, which in more than one circumstance has reduced an opponent to 0 home limit during their turn and forced a retiring of a number of high value friends. Oh, and then Counter Logic Factory too, because movement is busted. I find it so amusing that a card that has the words draw and magic counter on it, those aren't the reasons why the card was good. The card's good because free movement is dumb. Like, they're fine, but it's all the synergy that's present there.
Something opportunity cost.
Sure. Now, this deck doesn't have as many taxing methods as the mono-white Chrysalis list that we saw, but it is still running things that are going to be frustrating for your opponent. Small Pip is really, really irritating to deal with because she's so cheap, she can come down so early, and that tax is impactful.
This deck can't do it turn 1, but some decks could, and that sounds annoying.
This deck could do it turn 1 if it changed its starting problem.
Which is why I said it can't.
Right.
But it could.
Also worth noting that cards that say prepared on them are kind of inverse taxes in a way. What's the benefit of making your opponent pay more, right? The hope is that you're gaining momentum in terms of saying, well, my action tokens can go further than your action tokens can because your action tokens are getting eaten up by this kind of dead zone. Well, if you've got a board set up of unicorn tokens hiding behind troublemaker walls, and your opponent has reduced options to be able to go and try and sneak around those troublemakers, they may be forced to challenge. If they are, that challenge is costing them that AT momentum. They're putting it back in your favor. I think we've all been there where we've sat there and looked for any way around it and just had to challenge when there's been about 4 prepared unicorn tokens there behind a troublemaker wall, and it always, always, always ends badly. Because you basically just gave your opponent another turn. Apart from that, there's just good removal here to supplement this. Chaos Magic Blast is good. Windy, like we mentioned, can be good if your opponent is saying, I don't want to play stuff to home. Sprouticus not only does a great job of keeping the board relatively clear of everything, but also can trigger Pip. And then you've got Izzy Moonbow to pull back key pieces later in the game to get even more value out of them. And counting here, if we're also counting Sprout, we've got 7 pieces of resource removal in here with 2 Fashion Overloads, 3 Winterzillas, and 2 Sprouts. And I guess you can name Izzy as well. Oh, you remember how I mentioned that control decks like searching earlier? Well, if you're running a Troublemaker deck, it kind of doesn't matter how many epics you are or are not running. You should probably have 3 copies of Grogar because that's going to open up your options to play Toolbox Control with an entire card type.
And you've got some good toolboxes here, too.
Izzy's mean.
She's going to feel insulted for you thinking that.
Well, she should stop doing mean things. Let's look at the things that Izzy does. Izzy says, oh, did you spend effort getting rid of this? No, I'm going to keep using it. Oh, did I spend effort getting rid of this? Nope, I'm going to use it twice. And, oh, did you spend effort finding or playing this thing? Too bad, no one can use it. Please provide for me an example of where Izzy is being nice to her friends. I'll wait.
Good wait.
The stream just goes silent for the next 6 hours.
Mm-hmm. Another thing to look at here that definitely helps control, and can equally help aggro or mid-range as well, is pay attention to your problem's bonuses. Abilities are nice, but sometimes the risk of having a problem with a really, really powerful effect but a really high bonus can be a downfall. There are no problems in this deck that are likely to have a bonus of more than 1, and in fact, the majority of these are likely to have a bonus of 0, unless it is incredibly in your favor. Also, Prospecting Interruption is just a jerk move.
Really is.
But at least it gets you a point if you manage to, DFO there.
It does.
That's just like the salt block of points.
What, prospecting?
Yes. Congratulations, you wasted all this time. You don't get a point.
That bonus should just be a you tried. Once again, we have an example of Ray of Hope and Get Prepared doing work for color entry here, right? There's not that much that this deck actually needs to worry about for its color entry. A single Ray of Hope is going to be sufficient most times for getting into your pink. But the fact that you can retire Ray of Hope on your opponent's turn to get the necessary pink entry for a Windy or a Chaos Magic Blast when your opponent thinks they're safe, I saw Hithrock use numerous times over the course of that tournament. First priority window, retire Ray of Hope, name pink, and sometimes you gotta play into it, and sometimes you might delay yourself a turn.
At this, one of the major advantages that this deck had that you can't really reproduce is just a sheer surprise factor. I don't think anyone was really looking for something like this to show up.
That's a good point. because people had kind of counted Pip as a average performing main, when they were doing their internal testing or they were looking at what decks had been rolling around in the meta, they probably weren't considering a Pip deck to be a serious threat. And I know on at least 2 occasions, it's specifically because of a lack of awareness of Pip's ability and what you were retiring or what you were discarding that led to a massive momentum shift for the Pip deck. And if this had been something more prevalent or more known, like it is now, it probably would have caught fewer players off guard. Which means, even though this deck is this year's North American Continental Champion, winner, it might have a worse record moving forward simply because of exposure. It's not a combo deck, but the same kind of principles apply.
Yeah. So one of the things you can do to counter surprises like this is don't just build your archetype that you like. Try building other archetypes. Like, the best way to learn how to counter something like this is to play with it for a little bit to see how it wants to work. And then if you go up against it, you're like, okay.
Yeah, that's good advice in general. It can also help you understand more about those different archetypes, and it might turn you on to particular playstyles you didn't even realize you enjoyed.
Meanwhile, I'm over here trying to shove myself ever deeper into the tiny little nook that aggro has left. It's not working.
I'm still waiting.
Zoom.
I'm still waiting for you to build Silverstream Ceases the Means of Production. That's a deck name if I've ever heard one.
But is it a deck?
That's up to Ara.
It's something.
With that being said, I think it will wrap up our discussion.
Winter wrap up.
Yeah, I don't think we have a whole lot else to say on this topic for the moment. And what are we up to? Like, I think we're looking at, I think Ciderfest is the next major event.
Ciderfest is the next major event, though we do have online con scheduled.
Oh, that's right, there is an online con. I should go
2 weeks out, I think.
2 sounds correct. Let me go get that and plug that.
Yeah, October 5th.
There, I plugged it.
Hooray!
This online con is not just going back for some Harmony, because we haven't had a chance to really plumb the full depth of that madness yet. But it's also doing the pre-release. Pre-release, yes. For New Generation. So, 10 packs. Yes, the post
release.
The release formerly known as pre. For New Generations. So, a sealed event, all New Generations, ponies.
That will wrap up our discussion, I think.
Yeah, I got nothing else. Like, comment, subscribe.
We do hope to see many of you at that online con. It's going to be a good time. We would, of course, like to give a big shout out to all of our patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much for your regular support. We appreciate it so much that we showed your name at the start. If you aren't currently a patron and you enjoy what we do, please consider donating. Doing so does enable us to continue making content like this and lets you earn some great perks as a bonus. If you have comments or questions you'd like to send our way, feel free to reach out to us through Facebook, Twitter, or email. And if you're a patron, you can also chat live with us on Slack any day, anytime. Finally, if you're looking to watch any of our previous videos, including tournament recordings, you can find them on our YouTube channel, linked just below the stream. With all that said, thank you to each and every one of our viewers, both here now and watching this recording later. We are, as always, Commentary is Magic. I am, as always, Grand Paws.
Big Cheese.
Cat, and
And
Have you
air
actually
it out.
Ivory?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll see it on LineCon.
Bye.
Bye.